Okay, we're going to move on to Nathaniel. Nathaniel Foster is on the analytics services team at Workiva, and he does data pipelines and ETL jobs, which that's a lot of backend stuff, and often we don't think about backend stuff when we're talking about JAMStack. But Nathaniel's here to talk about AWS Serverless Image Handler. He has taught at the front-end program at the Turing School of Design. I'm sure he knows Lita. And he's also created cross-platform Cordova apps for Texas Roadhouse. So that's a business I want to go to after this whole quarantine thing is over. So Nathaniel, I'm really excited to hear about this backend serverless image handler stuff. So take it away.
Awesome, thank you so much. Nick approached me about talking at this, I was like, oh, cool. I can do something about mobile. I haven't done front end stuff in a while. But then as I was learning more about JAMStack, I actually didn't really know that much about JAMStack when he reached out. As I was learning more about it, I was like, oh, this seems like a really interesting way to make front end applications. So it's been a nice little learning experience for me. But I was like, well, how can I kind of apply some of the stuff that I'm more familiar with now, or that I'm working with more now? And so when I was first looking into this, I was thinking about images and all the different challenges that images present on the front end. It's like whether you want different sizes of images on your website for responsive websites, or if you want to just load images really quickly, maybe you want to load something that's a very low quality image and then a higher quality image later as it's needed. So I was actually looking into, at my job, I use some of the AWS services. So I was looking into maybe using an AWS Lambda to transform images on the fly. And that's when I kind of stumbled onto this solution that AWS provides. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Also, hello everybody, thank you so much for joining. And I hope you all are staying safe and healthy out there. And yeah, I'll dive into this. Awesome, Lita's presentation was. Thank you so much. That was really interesting, and her slides were way cooler than mine. So it's a lot of blue here.
You're gonna write on content, not Flash.
Thanks. So, anyways, I was really interested in how to handle different images that you may need with these statically generated websites, and so I was thinking that I might create a Lambda function that would process images for me. So I need to store images somewhere. I'd have a Lambda function that would process those images, and then I could just send requests to this Lambda function with whatever I need. And so I was going through this great tutorial, and then they're and then I noticed in the preface it was hey, you may want to check out AWS Serverless Lambda Image Handler. And so I followed their recommendation, and I'm glad I did because I didn't have to write nearly as much code. So AWS Serverless Image Handler is a solution. Well, actually, here, let me go over this outline real quick. So basically, I want to start by just talking about AWS Serverless Handler. That wasn't quite enough to do what I wanted to do. So I also had to add some permissioning around accessing S3 buckets, so I could basically query get all the images that I wanted from those buckets. And then I have this little photo album demo that I created. So one of the problems that I was kind of trying to address once again was we have all these images that we want to give to our consumers, and we don't want to use servers to process all these images. We don't want to do all that work to set up all that infrastructure and stuff. And we want to give them multiple ways of viewing images. So we have this creepy old photo, and we can make it look nice, maybe. And so, anyways, so we have this AWS Serverless Image Handler. This is an AWS solution, which basically just means it's a common problem that people run into, and they have packaged up this one thing, and it's really easy to install on their infrastructure. And it was really easy to set up. And so yeah, what it allows you to do is you can store your images in an S3 bucket. You can request, so you have one image, you request that image with whatever modifications you want. and you get it back, and it gets cached for you, and so it's just really easy to use. It was very easy to set up. You just walk through this like wizard with a few different steps. The hardest part was probably just making sure all the permissioning was set up correctly, and it's scalable and cheap. So really nice solution. This is just kind of like a rundown of some estimated costs that AWS provided for about 1 million requests. It estimates it's around $13. So I think that sounds pretty cheap to me. I'm not really into pricing out stuff, but yeah. Please don't send 1 million requests or do any DDoS attacks, because my authentication and security on this was very lax, very open. So this is kind of the infrastructure here for the AWS service handler. Oh my goodness, I didn't realize we could move these images around with all the people who are watching. But so what we have here is we have Amazon CloudFront. That's our CDN, or our content delivery network. It caches all the requests that come in. And so any image that you request, let's say you're like, hey, I want this image and I want it in grayscale. It'll cache that image for you so that future requests will be faster. We have our Amazon API gateway that handles all of our requests and just sets up our API for us. We have our AWS Lambda. That's where everything's getting set up for us, or where all the image processing is happening. And then we have our Amazon S3 bucket where we're storing our raw images. And then we have our client. So basically our client sends a request to our Amazon API gateway. That Amazon API gateway checks our CDN, our Amazon CloudFront. If the image isn't there, if the image is there, then cool, we just deliver it. If it's not there, we go to our AWS Lambda. We're like, hey, we need this image. The AWS Lambda grabs the raw image from our S3 bucket, processes it, sends it back to the API gateway, which stores it in our cache, and then sends it to our client as well. It's a nice little setup there. And on the client side, it's really easy to request that image. We have some like setup where we have like our CloudFront URL. We have our bucket that we have created on S3, which is Google's simple storage solution, or simple storage service, basically just file storage. We have our image key, which is our file name. And then we can pass in these edits, which are just like whatever modifications we want to make to that image. So in this case, I am passing in my bucket, my image key, and then for the edits, I am saying that, hey, I want this image to come back with 800 by 600. And then I can make my URL here. And so with that URL, I can either attach that to an image tag, like an image source tag, or the source property on an image tag, or I can request that, I don't know, using Ajax or something. And what's nice is they set up this, when you deploy this solution, this AWS Serverless Image Handler solution, you have the option to deploy this image handler demo. And it's really easy to later go in and turn this off. But we can actually do a little preview here. So this, I didn't make this. This is just part of the solution that that Amazon has created. But I have this kind of boring landscape picture here. But if I want to, so you kind of like specify the album it's in and the key name or the file name. And then we can like do different things to just see what our output looks like. What's nice is this is also a really good way to kind of get familiar with what the requests look like, because it's a little bit confusing if you didn't have this. So we have this like nice like little tiny version that maybe if we wanted to do like album, like if we had like tiles of albums or something, we could do that for. If we would just want to like get that image really quick, we can get this like tiny preview image. But there's a ton of different options for the different types of edits that you can do. Let's see here. I also, dang, whoops. I'm moving these little videos all over the place. So their API is great. There's like a ton of different options here. for all the different types of image modifications you can do. So this is Sharp, which is being used behind the scenes, I guess, by the Amazon Lambda to actually modify the images. So the Lambda is actually running Node.js, and this is a JavaScript library that runs in Node.js. So you got a lot of different options. The thing is that the only thing is like all their examples don't really show what your request should look like. So that's why it's nice to have this kind of demo here, just kind of like see what your request body looks like. I don't think they actually have all the options here in this demo either. So good to go check out the documentation, Sharp's documentation. Cool. So that's a little demo UI. Oh, and also one other thing with the demo UI, it also shows you what your encoded URL looks like. So basically, you stringify this request body and add it onto your URL. So as I mentioned earlier, the serverless image handler here, it doesn't really give me everything I need. If we look back at this code request here, I'm providing an image key, which I'm hard coding, and so this isn't great if you have more than one image, which I would imagine most people do. So what I realized is I want to put all my images in this S3 bucket, but I need to also be able to query this S3 bucket and or send a request to this S3 bucket and get a list of all my images that are in this bucket. So I had to do a little bit more work, and maybe somebody smarter than me, maybe there's a better way to do this. But what I ended up doing is I basically found another tutorial that went through how to put all your images in a bucket and set up the API so you can just query that bucket and list all the objects in that bucket. Luckily, S3 is actually really easy to set up as well and has a great API, so it wasn't really that much work. And once again, it was just a matter of setting up the permissioning correctly. So basically what you do, so the first thing that I want to do is I have this website that is a photo album. And what I want to do first is I want this to load really quickly. So what I want to do is I want to request and display a list of low resolution images. And then when the image is visible in the viewport, I want to go ahead and request a higher resolution image. So load the low resolution images really fast, and then start loading the higher resolution images. So what I started out doing is I have my browser script. I set up my SDK for my JavaScript SDK for Amazon S3 or AWS S3, and request a list of the objects that are in there. Then for each picture that's in my S3 bucket, I send a request to the image handler to request a low-res image and basically create a bunch of image tags, add that to my screen, and then as those start getting added in, I go back and I start requesting the higher resolution images. So that's kind of the project that I put together, the architecture for that. So setting up the permissioning for the S3 bucket. So I have this S3 bucket. It has all my images in it. I need to be able to send an API request from my front end, from my client, and list all the objects in that S3 bucket. AWS Cognito is the basically authentication that AWS has, or it's for setting up your authentication for AWS. In this case, I created an identity pool, and I have this Cognito photo album on-auth role. I can't talk here. So this unauthenticated role, and enable access to unauthenticated roles or identities. This is probably not something you want to do in real life, but that's what I did. It makes it so much easier though, and potentially more expensive. But so, and when you set up this these credentials in Cognito, you actually get this little snippet of JavaScript code that you copy into your front end code. So that was cool. That's one thing that you need to make sure you did do. So you kind of like set up your AWS config credentials. And one other thing about AWS Cognito is you can also set up auth with like Google Plus, which is apparently still a thing, maybe. And yeah, no, it's like I don't think it's actually a thing. But and with like Amazon and Twitter and Facebook, so you can like set up auth. You probably actually want to go ahead and just like set up auth with one of those things. Or there's also OAuth and a handful of other ones that you can set up with as well. So so what you do is you grab your role that you created in Cognito. You go over to IAM and you have to find that role and set up this policy. And this policy is going to be giving permission for this this user to access this bucket. So in this case, all that people can't write to this bucket, which is that's like a little thing that I did. But you can everybody can basically get an object out of this bucket, and everybody can list every object that's in this bucket. And my bucket here is called NF Photo Album, so they can do it for NF Photo Album and anything that's inside of NF Photo Album. Cool. So I've set up my authentication. I've set up this policy. I basically set up my user. I've set up my authentication for that user. And then the last thing that I had to do was set up the configure the cores on the actual bucket itself and configure that. And once again, I'm just allowing people to get stuff out of that bucket and request headers and from basically anywhere. And so permissioning, there really wasn't that much permissioning. It was just like a little bit of tweaking to make sure I did all the steps correctly. And then I have this duplicate slide here where I need to add my AWS Serverless Image Handler. So when you go through the tutorial for the AWS Serverless Image Handler, there's four steps with where you specify different options. Most of them you're just accepting the defaults. One thing you do have to specify at one point though is actually which bucket that you want to add this AWS Serverless Image Handler to. And I can probably pull that up. I'm gonna go ahead and see if we can find that really quick. Oh man. I probably have a screenshot of it that was supposed to go on that slide. I am not going to look for this because I'm not confident that I can find it quickly. But basically, as you're setting up the serverless handler, you just specify which bucket. There's a place where you specify which bucket you want to use, and you just have to say the name of it. Cool. So let me give you a little demo of this app. We can look at some code, and then we can maybe make a few modifications to the code and see the demo again. So this is a really cool demo because it is coming directly from an index.html file. So that's pretty sweet. That's how unsecure that bucket is. You can just, from a local file on my computer, you can request things from it. So this is my photo viewer here. If I refresh for a brief moment, you can kind of see this low res image, and then it gets to a higher res image. I'm also using a CSS blur, which we can take off for a moment to kind of see a little bit more of a jarring switch. But now as we scroll, I'm going to scroll down really quickly here, and we should see the low res image and then the higher res image kind of come into focus. So there's a low res image and then a higher res image. And so that's about it, really. It's And yeah, so a really simple little like app. Load some low-res images and then load some higher resolution images. Let's look at some code. And I'm going to stop sharing here for a second because I actually need to share everything. Okay, here we go. What a great tool Zoom is. I'm definitely using this over Google Hangouts in the future. Okay, so here's some code. There's like everything that I've blurred out in those images is freely available to see here, which is great. But there's like just like some setup, and then let's start at the bottom. This is where. So we start out by viewing our album. So we have this S3 object, which I set up here. And basically, this is the stuff that I got from Cognito, AWS Cognito. So I set kind of my credentials or my authenticated user or whatever, or unauthenticated user. I use that to create this, this connection to S3. And let's actually look at index.html here. I'm actually pulling in this, I'm doing old school. I'm not like importing anything. I'm just script tag. Here's a library. So I'm pulling in AWS S3, and here I'm just using the list objects, passing in my album photos key, which is, so it's just an album called all, because I put everything in there. And so I have this all photo album, and I pass that into S3. When I configure S3, I'm configure it with my bucket name. And then so it knows the bucket, then I'm listing the objects from this album, or this, which is just a folder inside of that S3 bucket. And then I'm just going through, I have this get image URL where I pass in a key, so an image file name and a width and a height. So I can do low res images, I can do high res images with this one function here. And then all I'm doing is I'm creating a bunch of image tags. I'm appending this to the page. Well, I'm combining them all together and doing it all at once and appending it to the page here. So it's a really basic, really simple app. Let's take out this blur here real quick. Let's do that, and then let's do also, I'm going to change my defaults here. So this way, we're going to be requesting a new set of images. So these aren't cached. These are going to be new because I've changed. I don't think I've used these width and heights before. So yeah, we should be good. And I also took out that blur. So actually, let's just, okay, yeah, we'll start with that. And here we go. So I'm just going to refresh. And it takes a little bit longer. Blurry image, higher resolution image. And as we scroll down, low resolution, higher resolution, and so on. So it's kind of cool. And then one other thing I wanted to do real quick was take out, I don't know, this is actually not that important, but if we wanted to, we could just take out that ad observer and we just have a bunch of blurry pictures. So yeah, so cool. If you want blurry pictures, you got them. So that's about it for the demo. It's also live on nathanielfoster.com. Wow. Yeah. I finally got my URL and finally put something on it. So this is good. And yeah, so I guess that's it. Questions, there's a link to the slides, an email address, which I was I got to start using this website. And also the code is up here on GitHub. So I guess this is hosted with GitHub Pages, and I bought the domain on Google, and hooked it up with the GitHub pages. That's the other thing. And I guess one other thing we can look at real quick is the S3 bucket, just in case anybody is curious what that looks like. Here we go. One other thing is you have to make sure that your your S3 bucket is in the same region as your AWS Cognito authenticated or unauthenticated user. So that's one other thing to keep in mind. So here I just have this all bucket or all folder inside of my in a photo album bucket, and click on that, and there's all the images. And so the only configuration I had to do here was in permissions, just make sure to set up that CORS. And actually, one other thing I had to do is turn these two on. Also, in the slides, there's like a list to a bunch of resources about that I used to kind of like set everything up.
Very cool. Thank you, Nathaniel. This is great. I mean, I've been dealing with image manipulation in AWS Lambdas for a while, and this is really interesting to see another way. Do you think that Amazon is going to come out with more services like this, like the image manipulation, where it's sort of pre-baked for you? Because I think a lot of people, when they hear JAMStack, they think that they can't do image manipulation like this, right? If you want a blurry image before you load the high res, that kind of stuff. So like, this is really cool to see this kind of stuff that's like just available for you. I'm really interested in
sure.
more.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because I was like, I know people have done Lambdas with image modifications. If you look it up, you can find so many tutorials on like, if you want to like create this yourself, you can like do that. But it was awesome to like find that, oh, I can just go through like 4 steps, get this set up, like spin this up really quickly, and then tell it which bucket I wanted to look at, or like a list of buckets. And then I can now I have an API set up where I can just send requests to it. It's going to cache it all for me. Because like if I set it up myself, like setting up I would like do the Lambda and the S3 bucket, but then I'd probably get lazy and not do the caching. But then until somebody complained, or like I started like getting annoyed about it, right, loading stuff. But so yeah, it was really nice. There are a lot of like AWS solutions in here. I looked through them a little bit. They're kind of like all over the place for everything from like analytics to stuff like this. So yeah, I think Amazon will keep on creating these like probably because I mean they want people to use their services, so as much as they can sell them, I guess, and like finding those common business needs.
Yeah, absolutely. That's super cool. Well, Zach, I'm going to hand it over to you, see if we have any questions from the stream.
Yeah, sure. I actually have a question myself. How would you say this compares to like a service like Cloudinary, or maybe one that's like hyper focused on just doing image management? Like, is there any benefits to like file manipulation as well that you've kind of experienced, or is it just purely images stuff that you've done?
For this solution, it's just images, and I don't know if has any benefits over those other services. I haven't really explored the space that much. I would say though, if you are already using Amazon services, then this seems like it would probably be the obvious choice for you. Or if you like, for some reason, you're like already using S3 buckets for like what your storage needs, it seems like it would be a really easy addition to like go ahead and add this on for that.
Yeah, I want to second that. Actually, I mentioned earlier, I've been building an image thing with AWS Lambdas, and it's to upload images to.
Oh, he froze.
If I was already using S3 and already using those other services, this would be an amazing, like, just drop it in and it's ready to go.
Yeah. All right. We do have a question from Mick Jeets again. Given your experience with the AWS architecture, do you see JAMStack as a viable methodology in the increasingly cloud-driven tech stack?
I think it is for a lot of use cases. I'm like the one like, so I'm still pretty new to JAMStack and like learning all that it is and all that it can be. But the areas where I'm most interested in like seeing where it can go is like rich web applications. Because it seems like it's really useful for content, like for like creating these like websites that are like very content heavy. But actually creating like a rich web application, I'm curious like how, like where Jamstack can go with that. And I imagine there's people with way more knowledge than me who could like, who probably know more about that. But I think that's like, I guess where I get skeptical about Jamstack is like how far can it go into like creating these like really like a Google Docs or like Google spreadsheets or something. You know, it's like how far can we get towards creating something like that with Jamstack? But
Cool. We got another question from Bry Beecher. Just curious, what piece of implementing this was the most difficult for you?
I think it was the permissioning, which wasn't really that bad. And also just getting the images to trigger correctly when I scrolled. But I just like, there's actually something new that I hadn't ever used before called an interaction observer, which is pretty cool. So basically you can like watch whatever element, and whenever it collides basically with another element, in this case the viewport, or comes into view focus of the viewport.
I kind of. Oh, you're good.
Oh, okay. And
Zoom keeps raising.
So it wasn't that bad. I guess I went through a few iterations of like kind of like refining what I was trying to build, but yeah, it wasn't that bad. I guess like just making sure that I connected the different pieces in Amazon correctly. But I found like a pretty good, like straightforward tutorial. I guess like Amazon's documentation is pretty solid, seems like.
Cool. Any more questions from chat? You gonna get them in now. Don't think we got any form submissions, so yeah, it doesn't look like it. Well, yeah, it doesn't look like we have any more questions at least in chat. So
sweet. Well, Nathaniel, cool. Congratulations on getting your own name.com. That's a big win.
Thank you. I'll never let it go. Now I just need to get dangerfoster.com.
Yeah.